Thank you for joining us on our YouTube channel as we strive to get a more progressive voice of faith out to a larger audience. Our videos are mostly from the pastor at Community Christian Church in Springfield, Missouri, Dr. Roger Ray. We are always pleased to have feedback from our viewers. You can visit our website at spfccc.org or write to us at reverend.drray@aol.com.
You know, every holiday season we hear people sweating the challenge about what can you get for the person who has everything. And that question always just sends a shudder down my spine, because why on earth would we worry about that person? Why would you want to actually give something to someone who is already absolutely buried in material wealth? And I can tell you from experience that it's much more difficult to know what to give someone who has chosen to have almost nothing at all. For many years of my life, I was a good friend to the Trappist community at the Gethsemane Monastery in Kentucky, and Brother Luke, the guest master, was a particular friend of mine, very important in my life, and so I always wanted to be around on his birthday and holidays, and wanted to give him gifts, but it's very hard to find something to give to a Trappist monk. Luke keeps in his cell 2 changes of clothing, a few personal photographs, a couple of books, and generally nothing else. Now, in the Trappist order, the abbot will allow monks to have a few personal possessions. And over the past 30 years, I've known Luke to have a couple of hobbies. You know, he's a musician, and so for a little while he had a portable personal stereo that he called a walk monk. And after that, he got interested in photography, and he had a camera for a while. But in each instance, as he realized that he was enjoying it a little too much, spending a little too much time with it, he would give it to someone else, because he didn't want any of those personal items to become a distraction from his primary vocation, which was to pray and to serve his community. But Luke is perennially skinny. He stays cold from the 1st of September until the end of May every year. And so for Christmas one year, I bought him a couple of pairs of really heavy thermal wool socks. Because, you know, Trappist monks are the only people in the world who should be allowed to wear socks with sandals. I don't know, fashion-wise, if you're really looking for any advice from me, but unless you're wearing an alb, you should not also put socks on with your sandals. But I remember the day that he opened that package, and the look on his face was this sudden crisis. Because in a way, I had hit a home run. The thick wool socks were exactly what he would love to wear. But as he explained later, he already had 2 pairs of socks. And he felt that he shouldn't keep any more, that he should give those away. Now, in movies and a lot of literature, monastic communities are often portrayed as being filled with sick masochists who beat themselves with whips and impose painful penance on themselves and others. And that is a gross misrepresentation of what monastic communities are really like. On the same scale as pointing at Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, and saying that he's a good example of Midwestern Christianity. Monks, by and large, are persons of great discipline and devotion. In our epistle lesson today, the Apostle Paul uses what I'm going to call the terribly unfortunate choice of words to express this sense of personal discipline. He says, I beat my body to become its master. And unfortunately, history is replete with examples of people who took that sentence way too literally. But what he was saying was that he disciplined himself to keep from being run over by his appetites. One of the Desert Fathers from the Alexandrian tradition explained the practice this way. He said, we never take our fill of bread so that we do not desire meat. We never take our fill of water so that we never lust for wine. The life of a monk, either in ancient Alexandria or in modern-day Kentucky, would seem absurdly severe to any of us. Not only beyond our reach, but in fact, pretty far beyond anything we really want to do. I mean, no one really wants to live with that kind of severity. But the merit of their example of faith can only be understood when you look at the opposite extreme. The news is full of disgusting examples of outrageous bonuses paid to investment bankers and greedy insider trading on the part of both corporate bosses and elected officials. We are shocked to discover that members of Congress and the Senate go to Washington nearly bankrupt and leave a few years later as multimillionaires when we know that their salary is not that high. It's easy, though, for us to sit and point out the excesses of the fabulously rich. And you all know that I've written a lot about that. I've talked about it a lot. Economic justice is one of the largest issues of my own professional practice. As our nation is now being forced into a period of history when we are now coming to possess a privileged, wealthy class supported by a permanently poor peasant class. But you know, we really don't have to devote all of our attention to the 1% whose personal habits we don't control. Every person in this room and every person within the sound of my voice, every one of you, has a dark, greedy, pleasure-seeking, and pain-avoiding part of your character that Freud calls the id. It is a part of us. It's a part of every greedy Wall Street banker. It's a part of every third world dictator, but it's also a part of the Pope. It's also a part of everyone who tries to be a prophet. What seems to me to be the greater spiritual issue is how each and every one of us addresses our own id, not how we criticize other people's, but how do we address that dark shadow that exists inside our own character, our own appetites, which drive us like animals to constantly seek pleasure and to avoid pain. Seeing Brother Luke stand and sweat about a decision of whether or not it would be morally wrong for him to have 4 pairs of socks instead of 2 makes me wonder about an awful lot of my personal choices. Should I cook at home or let myself eat out again? Should I buy a used car or a new car? Should I join a gym or just discipline myself to walk and jog in my neighborhood and exercise at home? As our economy has languished in a nearly imperceptible recovery, you notice we have to be told, we have to watch the news to be told that there's a recovery because we can't see it. If there's a recovery, we're not able to tell it. But a lot of Americans have learned how to tighten their belts and have learned that living on their credit cards in the assumption, which a lot of young people do, they live on their credit cards assuming that they'll make more money next year than they make this year. And that assumption is turning out to not be true. Many of us have never learned the ability to just say no to our appetites. Buying impulsively, scratching every itch, trying to satisfy every desire until we become imprisoned by debt. Debt, as one commentator put it recently, is the new slavery. As we were shocked yesterday by the news of Whitney Houston's death, and I don't want to jump to conclusions about her death, but we are aware, most of us, that she had suffered from multiple drug addictions that had ruined her talented and beautiful life, and probably has now cut her life span in half. Addiction is the saddest and most wasteful example of how our appetites can just run over us, that can turn on us and consume us. As most of you know, I've been working for the past several months to try to lose a lot of extra preacher flesh. And losing weight is a fascinating topic about which absolutely everyone on earth has advice that they are dying to give to you, almost entirely unsolicited and almost universally wrong. I mean, most of what people want to tell you about how to lose weight is not just scientifically, but practically completely mistaken. But everybody wants to believe that there are easy ways to become slender and healthy. Just take these pills or sprinkle this on your food. And television is full of ads for exercise equipment that if you will just spend 20 minutes 3 times a week, you will end up looking like a supermodel. And then if you jog through your neighborhood, as I do, on any day when there's a yard sale, you see for sale in driveways. All of the magical machines that have broken hearts and disappointed people through their lives. It's all lies. There is nothing you can do for 20 minutes 3 times a week and end up with the cut bodies they show on those exercise videos, unless what you're doing for 20 minutes 3 times a week is receiving liposuction, which I just don't think it's affordable. There's nothing that you can take that will kill your appetite and yet leave you feeling energized and not hungry anymore, except for some of those controlled substances which are available for purchase on many street corners, but they come with them the downsides of addiction and lengthy prison sentences. Here is the one and only honest secret to losing weight. It's very simple. It is the ability to be hungry and to choose not to eat. That's really it. It helps to avoid fried food. It helps to avoid sugars and fats and but the time of day you eat, really it comes down to this. Can you experience hunger and choose not to eat? To say no to your appetite. Look, just eating salads, that's not going to do it. I don't want to be the first one to surprise you all this morning, but fat people eat salads. I think salads are delicious, but I want to remind you that every cow, hippopotami, and elephant in the world eats nothing but green leafy vegetables. So the fattest animals on earth eat nothing but salad with no dressing. And they're still fat. But we here in Springfield live in the capital of all-you-can-eat buffets. Men and women, no one should eat all they can eat, ever. But the buffet becomes a symbol for our bloated society when we can never tell that we've had enough. We stand over buffets of steaming cashew chicken and fried foods like Gollum in Lord of the Rings holding the magic ring. Precious, my precious, it's mine and we want it. Now, we can make fun of the prudish and puritanical religion that wants to make you feel guilty for every indulgence in anything. And I despise, I'm using the word despise here, I despise neurotic religious guilt that is basically human hating, that makes you feel bad about every aspect of what it means to be a Homo sapien. But anything that you cannot say no to is, in fact, your master. Anything that you cannot resist becomes your slave master. There is, in my opinion, nothing wrong with moderate alcohol consumption. In fact, I can say a great deal of good comes from moderate alcohol consumption, especially when someone else is buying. But the problem is that about 1 in 5 people in society cannot drink moderately. They just can't. They cannot stop. 1 is too many, and a dozen is not enough. But beer and liquor commercials always associate drinking with happy, sexy people who are having a great time. But I want to share some math about that with you. And this is from a recently published AMA report. American Medical Association did the research. Out of any 10 alcoholic beverages sold in the United States, 6 of them are consumed by one person, an alcoholic. You spread 10 alcoholic drinks among 14 Americans, and 4 of them won't drink any. Someone will drink 1, 2 people will drink half of 1, but 1 person will drink 6 of them. So without alcoholics, most of the distilleries, most of the beer distributorships, most of the bars and restaurants would go out of business. They put these beautiful ads up to try to make their industry seem like it's just a fun-loving celebratory time. But in fact, they make their profit off of addiction. Addicts drive the market. Addiction just is masked by pretty advertisements, so that 1 out of every 10 cars being driven on the roads in America are being driven by someone who is intoxicated. Even cigarette smoking wouldn't be a bad thing if people would just have 1 or 2 a week, but the fact is that nobody does. It's a product which, when used as directed, kills the consumer. The inability to say no to our appetites for drugs, alcohol, sex, tobacco, wealth, power, that is what drove people, religious people, to the extremism of using fear and guilt to drive the monster of appetite back into the cave. My mother, who was the travel agent for guilt trips, used religion as a way to make sure that her sons, particularly their daughter for whatever reason got a pass, but their sons were to feel guilty about absolutely everything that we were inclined to do. But her awareness is that if you don't have some checks to your appetites will run over you and leave you looking like roadkill. What we need to control our appetites, whose aim is to enslave us, is not a sick religion to counter a sick addiction. What we want is a healthy spirituality that empowers us, that teaches us the discipline of being able to say no to our addictions, to our appetites. Not to beat ourselves into submission, but to be willing to endure the pain of being hungry but choosing not to eat, to endure the discomfort of wanting something but deciding not to buy it, of being to desire some comfort or some pleasure that we then decide that we can live without, to be able to resist eating everything we can eat so that we can share our bread with the less fortunate. Now, I'm certainly not afraid to be critical of Paul, and frankly, I often am. But in this case, I think the apostle has gotten a bad rap. I think what he is telling us is, in fact, very similar to the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. And it's interesting that North American Christians oftentimes find it easier to hear from the Buddha than we do from the Apostle Paul, but Buddha somehow seems exotic. But let me just tell you what the 4 noble truths of Buddhism are. The first is that life is full of suffering, and the word suffering implies all kinds of discomfort or dis-ease. The second is that our suffering comes from our attachment, is the way the word is usually translated, but it really means desire or appetite, our desire for certain outcomes or to have certain things. Life is suffering. Suffering comes from desire. And then the third is the solution to suffering is to empty ourselves of desire, to let go of the desire to eat, to consume, to drink, to inject, to own, to control. And the fourth is to live a life path that is a gradual growing of a spiritual discipline that is free from attachment. In that, I believe that American Christians really do have a lot to learn from Buddhism. The pathway to a good life is a path of letting go of being controlled by or enslaved to our appetites. Now, our religion is not based, or shouldn't be based, on superstition or mythology or any denial of reality. It sure shouldn't be based on guilt or fear or neurotic self-loathing. The best shorthand that I can come up with for what I think the Christian life is to simply say, love is my religion. Love of others calls us to lead lives of self-sacrifice so that we don't eat everything we can hold, so that we can share, so that we don't build the biggest house we can possibly pay for, so that we can share with those who are homeless, so that we can sacrifice some of our present moment so that other people might have a future. Love of self calls us to a life of devotion to the truth and an absolute refusal to be enslaved to debt, be it a payday loan shop or a credit card. We will not surrender our freedom to addiction, to gluttony, or to greed, nor will we stand idly by when such businesses are taking advantage of the vulnerable and the poor whose appetites have trapped them. we will stand up for those who do not have the strength to stand for themselves.
Amen.